Hey guys, welcome back to a Q&A on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel. So we're going to be covering a lot of topics that were brought up in the Q&A I posted on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel community tab. So we'll get to that in just a second. So basically, since it's the dead period between the Super Bowl and the offseason, I sort of wanted to do an offseason primer where I tackled some of your guys' biggest questions heading into free agency, the draft, what the Chargers should do with cuts, the offseason in general. And so, yeah, that's what I wanted to do when I posted that Q&A. So just to put on my screen for 1 second, you'll probably see that I put it kind of over here. So if you go to our channel's community tab, you will see any future Q&As or anything I post. So let's get to this Q&A. I sort of meant to do this just to test it out. I had never used the community tab personally, so I just wanted to see how people would use it, and we did get a lot of good questions. So the first question comes from Con Positive. He asks, thoughts on if the Chargers wanted to make a big signing in free agency, who would it be? And he also commented and said he also loves my Twitter. So to pick his question. So I will make sure to pick your question, Con Positive. And if you do want to go follow me on Twitter, you can go follow me at AlexInsdorf99. But big free agent signing. So I don't think it's going to be someone like a star wide receiver. I think the offensive line is the first place you really look. Obviously, we saw Telesco go kind of big on the offensive line last year, bringing in Trey Turner and Brian Bulaga. He can get off of Trey Turner's contract this year and kind of re-enter that free agent offensive line market. You see some of the guys here, right? Brandon Scherf, you see Joe Thuney, you see potentially Trent Williams if they don't reach a contract in San Francisco, but I think they ultimately will. And we did have Sage Surratt, the Steelers offensive line coach, come as an assistant to the offensive line coach over here in Los Angeles. So it wouldn't shock me if someone like Alejandro Villanueva, who you see over here, would be a decent free agent target. Wouldn't be a big signing, but I think those are the free agent linemen where it's like, okay, those are day one impact guy starters that they're going to pay pretty decently well. So I think the offensive line, we mentioned Corey Linsley on the podcast as well. I think though that's the first spot that you look at in free agency and you're like, okay, Chargers could spend some cash here. The other places outside linebacker, the edge in general, I think will be an area of focus because they're probably going to move on from Melvin Ingram. And if they do that, we have talked about Leonard Floyd, obviously potentially joining the team in this Brandon Staley 3-4 system. There's a couple other guys that I think would make sense in that kind of same role. I think Levante David's probably staying in Tampa Bay. But yeah, you have Leonard Floyd coming over from Los Angeles potentially. And I think there's kind of a couple other not so expensive options that they could also pick up. But yeah, Leonard Floyd has been a guy that has been rumored for a while. John Johnson, the safety from the Rams, if they wanted to let Raeshawn Jenkins go and pair him with Derwin James, it really wouldn't surprise me. That's kind of another guy that makes a lot of sense. So in general, I think if they want to make a big free agent signing, it'll be offensive line, outside linebacker, and then maybe you go look at corner a little bit. I think AJ Bouye is available. Patrick Peterson is available. If they wanted to figure out if they wanted to do something different with Casey Hayward, and mix up the cornerback group a little bit, say Michael Davis walks in free agency, then I think that cornerback could be an interesting spot for them as well. So I think those are the three groups if they're looking to make a big kind of splash signing. Ross Moreau asks, if we cut Hayward or Harris, or for some odd reason don't re-sign Davis, who are some of the free agent cornerbacks that could be a solid option? Good question. So I think when you look at the free agent cornerbacks, let's just update this. Obviously, we know from a report earlier this week that Patrick Peterson, the Cardinals, are looking to part ways. That wouldn't surprise me at all. I think he's a bit more he's a bit more athletic than like a Casey Hayward type. So that would not surprise me if they wanted to go in that direction. I don't know why spot track looks like it's down right now. Okay. Other free agent cornerbacks other than Patrick Peterson. I mentioned in my Bolt Beat article, William Jackson. He is a cornerback for the Cincinnati Bengals that hasn't quite reached his potential yet. He had a really stellar rookie season, then has had kind of 2 seasons that were like 70 PFF grades. He's been fine, but he's not someone that I'm sure the Bengals want to commit big corner money to, right? So I think he could be an interesting option if Michael Davis leaves, because he's also really fast, not a lockdown corner, but definitely good in coverage for sure. And I think his spot track market value was like 6.3 million. So there's a couple interesting options, also depth pieces that'll kind of be available in free agency. But in general, I think if they cut Casey Hayward, you're probably looking at like maybe a Patrick Peterson on a kind of limited deal. I think then, I just mentioned William Jackson. I think you would be looking at someone who has some upside for at least the next 1 or 2 years. And Davis is probably kind of the same thing. Harris is a little bit more interesting if they decide to cut him. I don't think they have any plans to cut Harris at all. Everything Ronaldo, Hill, and Staley have said has basically been confirmation that Harris is staying. I think if they were to replace Harris, they would likely go through the draft. And that would probably mean a guy like Kerry Vincent out of LSU, Elijah Molden. There's a bunch of decent slot corners in this draft. So I think if they were to cut Hayward, you're probably looking at some decent outside corners, maybe Pat Pete on a short-term deal, William Jackson. Harris, you're looking at probably some slot corners in the draft. Thoughts on cutting Mike and grabbing a cheaper Corey Davis? I think there's an interesting Mike Williams section to these questions that might just be half of them. I'll kind of pair this into this question, which was, so James asked the Mike Williams, Corey Davis question. Aaron Lothbrook asked, what are we doing with Mike Williams? So I'll answer both of those kind of in one shot, and then we'll see if there's any more Mike Williams questions. I think in general that they're not cutting Mike Williams. Basically, they wouldn't be cutting Mike Williams anyway. It would be rescinding his 5th-year option that they projected him to sign last year, or they basically said they were picking up his 5th-year option. They don't sign that till I think the beginning of the season, though. They don't sign it at the time that they say that they're picking up the 5th-year option. And technically, they can rescind the 5th-year option because Mike Williams's contract or his rookie deal took place before the new CBA. So technically, they can rescind it and not receive much of a cap penalty at all if they wanted to do that. I just think the cutting Mike Williams discussion and basically clearing that $15 million off the books completely and letting him test free agency, it's just not how the Chargers tend to operate. And I totally get why, based off of last season, that some Chargers fans are down on Mike Williams. But, it is worth pointing out he did just have 1 fewer reception and did develop a better intermediate game as a receiver. He did have the drop pass in the end zone in Oakland, but I still think Mike Williams is a solid dude. Now, I know a lot of people get scared about the $15 million cap hit specifically for this season, but the Chargers can afford that, right? The whole point of sort of having this Justin Herbert rookie deal is that you're able to pay the guys around him. And if they do extend Mike Williams, I wouldn't expect it to be at a $15 million per year clip, right? One of the ways that deal could work is like you could see the Chargers kind of come to a team-friendly number with him. So instead of a $15 million per year, they might give him 3 years, $30 million, right? Something like that. I'm not saying it'll be that number specifically, but you could see them coming to a $10 or $11 million deal easier than a 15. So if you give him those years kind of up front, then I think that could be a discussion for Mike Williams. I think the most likely thing is that they're going to let him play under the $15 million option and then see where they are in 2020. And then, if Mike Williams starts blowing it up during the season, then they might intensify sort of the contract talks and trying to get him a new deal. As far as Corey Davis is an interesting one. I think if they trade Mike Williams, if they were to pursue an Orlando Brown trade, a JJ Watt trade, something like that, if they were to pursue that, I think Corey Davis would be very interesting because he kind of fills some of Mike Williams' skill set. I don't think he's quite as athletic as Mike Williams, and I don't think he's going to make some of the same 50-50 jump balls, but I do think he has a bit more finesse as a route runner. So if you wanted to get Corey Davis at like a 3 years, $30 million after you trade Mike Williams, that's an interesting discussion. I like Corey Davis a lot in this free agency group just because I think he's sort of going a little bit under the radar. But in general, I know a lot of people have suggested the idea of cutting Mike Williams based on a slight decline in production last year. I just don't think this team is going to cut Mike Williams. I think the two real options are they trade him, or really there's three options with Mike Williams. They trade him, they let him play under the $15 million fifth year option, or they sign him to an extension that sort of lessens the effect of the $15 million cap hit. I think those are the three options. I think the most likely one is they just let him play out the season on the $15 million, or they extend him. But I think the most likely outcome is they let him play on the option. So that's sort of my Mike Williams sidebar. I do not think he's getting cut. Micah Anderson. Is a big offseason trade a realistic option given Telesco's usual lack of aggression in that regard? For example, an Orlando Brown or a JJ Watt trade. A lot of people have asked about Orlando Brown and JJ Watt. I don't know if I would classify Telesco as having a lack of aggression. I think last season he was actually quite aggressive. He did swing the Okung for Turner trade, which a lot of us thought was a win at the time. Then we saw Turner take the field and get injured, and it turned out bad. But he was actually aggressive in that regard, right? It wasn't just like, oh, I have to hold on to Russell Okung, right? It was, I'm going to go get this guy, right? We also saw the draft where he traded up into the first round to go grab Kenneth Murray, right? I don't think through Telesco's whole tenure that we had actually seen him trade up in the first round. So seeing that was pretty aggressive. Now, Orlando Brown, I think, is the more likely one rather than JJ Watt. The reason I think JJ Watt doesn't make a lot of sense is you're absorbing a 1 year, $17.5 million cap hit, which they could theoretically do. But it's like the Chargers aren't one JJ Watt away from a Super Bowl run. I think this team will certainly be in some playoff discussions, without a doubt. But, JJ Watt is the kind of move that I see like a team like the Chiefs making, or, someone who's in that Super Bowl orbit. The Chargers aren't there yet. And I don't think the JJ Watt move for 1 year makes a lot of sense because you're giving up draft capital for a guy who's likely only going to be there for a year and probably not extended. And he's also sort of limited in his age and has this injury history. I think that's a bit of a stretch for JJ Watt. Now, if JJ Watt is released, and let me bring up the JJ Watt cap numbers so I can kind of explain this. I believe the way that JJ Watt's contract kind of works is he has I think 1 year, $17.5 million left. Yeah. But he's already been paid all of his guaranteed money by the Texans. So the Texans actually don't owe him anything, and they could theoretically cut him or agree to some sort of buyout agreement, but they don't technically owe him any guaranteed money. So if teams don't want to trade for him to absorb that cap hit, then, he might end up sort of on the buyout market that, the Chargers could pursue there. But in general, I don't think the Chargers will pursue a JJ Watt type dude via trade. I just don't think that's how they operate. Not that they're not aggressive, not that they sometimes don't make trades, but absorbing a $17.5 million cap hit for a year, that seems like a move that Telesco might make if the Chargers were in like the Super Bowl stratosphere, but I don't think they're quite there yet. Orlando Brown, on the other hand, I think that one is a lot likelier just because Telesco has stressed specifically this offseason. He hasn't sugarcoated how he feels about the offensive line in comparison to recent off seasons. He's just been like, hey, we need to fix the offensive line. And I think that Orlando Brown would be an interesting start. So I would say Orlando Brown is the much likelier trade option. I'm not saying it'll happen, but I think that's the much more likely one over JJ Watt. Edward Rowland. I see the Chargers picking up one of two, Orlando Brown and JJ Watt, and drafting another lineman with the first pick. This team could be healthy if a top 5 team instantly. Re-sign Henry and Davis, let Williams go, which I hate, but pick up Juju. And I believe the team is set. Okay, I agree with you on picking up Orlando Brown, if that's what they ultimately want to do. The only thing is, if you pick up Orlando Brown based on the package that the Ravens are asking for, you may not have that first pick. That's been a discussion based on the package the Ravens are wanting. I don't know if the Chargers would be willing to trade the first pick, but that could be under consideration in terms of what the Ravens are looking for. I don't believe the Chargers are a top 5 team instantly, even if they make an Orlando Brown trade and grab, like, I don't know, Elijah Vera Tucker. Even if they get 2 really great offensive linemen, I still think this team has some problems in the cornerback room, sort of their pass rush. I think they need to figure out some things before they're a top 5 team. Not saying they won't get there. I think they could get there eventually, but I don't see them being a top 5 team next year. But a lot of things can change. Resign Henry and Davis, let Williams go, which I hate, but pick up Juju. I guess. If you're asking me which overpaid receiver I would like between Williams and Juju for next year, I'm probably going to take Mike Williams. Mike Williams at least provides that kind of jump ball ability. I didn't think Juju was very good this year. Granted, he was also dealing with the deteriorated Ben Roethlisberger. But yeah, I don't see Juju as much of a Chargers fit, given that they kind of have Keenan Allen as sort of the route running receiver already, and he's a lot better. I don't think Juju adds a lot to this offense at all. I would probably rather keep Williams, to be honest. All right. Don Aniano, another Orlando Brown, JJ Watt question. What do you see as more realistic? Mike Williams traded for Orlando Brown or for JJ Watt? Orlando Brown. I think, again, that trade is more realistic for the Chargers in general, but you also consider the Ravens, and they need a receiver. They really need to get receivers for Lamar Jackson to work with. The Texans probably aren't looking to take on many new receivers. I think they know if they trade JJ Watt, if they trade Deshaun Watson, they're probably hitting the rebuild button anyway. So I think Mike Williams would be more likely to be traded for Orlando Brown based on Baltimore's need for a wide receiver. And I think you could make it like Mike Williams plus a second plus a third. I'm not sure if that totally seals the deal. But I think that Mike Williams for Orlando Brown is a lot more realistic. If we sign Thuney or Linsley or trade for Orlando Brown, do you think the Chargers will still draft a lineman in the first round? I have no idea if the Chargers are going to draft a lineman in the first round. And this goes back to what we've been talking about on the podcast. I honestly have no idea what the Chargers are ever going to do in the first round. I did not expect Joey Bosa to be picked. A quarterback, but I didn't necessarily know if they were going to go Justin Herbert last year. And 2018, Derwin James. I didn't see Jerry Tillery coming much at all at the time. And then, since then, Tom Telesco sort of had a tradition of picking Golden Domers. But I think the Chargers will draft an lineman in the first round, barring there being a talent that they really like. As sort of a best player available type deal. To me, though, there's sort of 2 independent variables, right? I think what the Chargers do in free agency, if they do sign like a Thuney or Linsley, is sort of independent on what the Chargers do with the first round pick. Because I just think they're going to take whoever they believe is the best fit and best player available. I don't think that necessarily guarantees it's a lineman, but I also don't believe, say they signed Linsley, that Elijah Vera Tucker is just thrown off their board because he's interior, right? Because he also, someone like that also can kind of do inside, outside. He can kind of do a lot of things. I don't think that if they sign some linemen in free agency that will bar them from taking a lineman in the first round. But I also don't know if taking a lineman is the plan anyway. We all sort of think it's the plan, but also Telesco hasn't picked a lineman in the first round in a while, right? Okay. Next question from T. Flowen. Do we keep Casey Hayward and Mike Williams? Maybe a video on the most ideal, realistic offseason. I might do a video on that down the road, but this is just the Q&A for now. I think they would be... I think they keep Mike Williams. Casey Hayward is the interesting one that I've talked about. And I know it seems kind of like a stretch to cut him because then you would need to replace him in free agency or the draft. The only reason that I've sort of been suggesting that Casey Hayward is a very possible cut is because he is due $11.7 million and has $2 million in dead cap, which means altogether you would save about $10 million or 9.7 by cutting Casey Hayward. So I think that is a substantial enough amount of money to the point where the Chargers go, okay, you are 32 coming off of injury, and we are switching to this Staley scheme, which will require a lot more movement, less, zone coverages. And that's sort of something that I'm not sure Casey is best suited for. So I think Mike Williams is definitely probably an 80% chance he's being kept. Casey Hayward, I think, is around 40 to 60 that he's cut. I think that could be kind of an interesting, I think that's a much more toss-up situation. I think they'll keep Mike Williams. Not sure about Casey Hayward, basically, is the short of it. What do you think the Chargers will do with Raeshawn Jenkins? This is actually an interesting one. Raeshawn, I mean, he did provide good depth this year, right? Once Derwin James did go down, he was able to fill in pretty sufficiently. I actually thought he was a lot more decisive in his movement and decisions, just as a whole compared to 2019 when Derwin was out. And he also had a lot more to sustain in the secondary, right? I mean, because you have the down year from Casey Hayward. He, in the process of all this, he also had to bring along a safety in Nasir Adderley, who, he was basically playing with for 90% of the year. I think Raeshawn could be brought back up as depth. I sort of could also see the Chargers making a move at safety. I know we've mentioned John Johnson on the show kind of a lot as a potential Staley free agent coming over. But I don't know if that would necessarily take Raeshawn Jenkins out of the conversation of coming back. It just depends on how much money he wants. I don't know if his offer is going to be super large around the league, but I really wouldn't mind having Jenkins back. I think at worst, he's good depth to have for another free agent safety that's brought in, or another draft safety that's brought in some way. I think Jenkins was a really good player last year, at least compared to his previous years. He's definitely kind of been showing improvement a lot. Jay Fiva for sure. Oh, I think this was talking about Jason Verrett if they cut corners. And that was actually another guy I wanted to talk about. Jason Verrett is an interesting one because if he is available from the Niners, and Telesco did like him a lot in the draft, enough to take him. So Jason Verrett would be an interesting guy to watch out in free agency. I'm not sure where the comment went, but there was a comment I saw asking me about Micah Parsons. I can't find it, but there was basically a question on this. I don't remember who sent it, asking us sort of why we sleep on Micah Parsons as a draft pick. And I believe he likened taking Micah Parsons this year to Derwin James in previous years. So my thought on that is I don't think Micah Parsons is going to be available at 13. It's possible. I just don't see it happening. The other thing is Micah Parsons they just took Kenneth Murray. I mean, that's sort of the issue for me as I look at it, is you're just not getting the most utility out of that pick because you're going to have one of the middle linebackers you took in the top 20 of the draft, playing outside of their position. And then down the road, it's like, okay, are we keeping Kenneth Murray as our middle linebacker of the future, or are we keeping Micah Parsons, right? That's a move that I think if you're like a real Super Bowl contender, you might be able to make, just like, okay, we filled our holes everywhere else. Let's just keep stacking talent. But I don't think that's where the Chargers are, where they can just like afford to do that. I also think it's different than the Derwin James situation in 2017, or sorry, the 2018 draft, because the 2017 Chargers safeties were, I believe it was Jaleel Addae, Trey Boston, and Adrian Phillips, who, I mean, were all decent at the time, but like they weren't, long-term options there, right? So it was important to draft a Derwin James or a safety. We didn't know that they were going to take Derwin in the first round, but it was still important. And, now Jaleel Addae is a practice squad player. Trey Boston is in Carolina, kind of playing a rotational role. I wish Adrian Phillips was still on this team, but he's in New England, and he took over a bit for Patrick Chung this year when he opted out with COVID. But I just think when you look at the middle linebackers on this, or the linebacker core as a whole on this team, it's Kenneth Murray, right? You have Drew Tranquill, you have Kaiser White. That's a pretty solid starting three. Like, I really don't think you need to acquire another big presence in middle linebacker or something to shake it up. Like, you took Kenneth Murray last year. Now, if they didn't make that move into the first round, I think it would be a different scenario situation with Micah Parsons. And you could totally make the argument at that point. But it's like, okay, if you're bringing in Denzel Perriman and maybe Nick Vigil back in free agency, the linebacker group is just much more settled than the safety group was in 2018 when they took Derwin James. That's just sort of my ultimate thought on that. And yeah, so from a utility aspect, I don't love the pick. From a financial aspect, I don't love the pick based on what you would have to do eventually with Kenneth Murray and Micah Parsons in terms of giving them extensions. And the off the field things are a concern. I mean, the dude has been accused of sexual assault by a teammate at Penn State. And a lot of players were named in that report. Steven has brought it up more than I have, but like Tom Telesco just doesn't draft guys with character concerns. And we've seen this year after year. Tom Telesco isn't a guy who's going to go draft Joe Mixon after, Joe Mixon's pre-draft incidents, right? So I just don't see Micah Parsons as a fit from a financial, utility, or a character concern perspective. And I also don't think he'll be at the board at 13. So that was my thought on that question. I know I saw it before, but it looks like it got taken down for some reason. I don't know why. Okay, I think there was one more question somewhere. Josh Brockwell says, with a switch to a more 3-4 oriented D under Staley, do you think A, Tillery could play 3-4 right end? And if not, how would you fill this roster spot? B, do you think do you see Staley trying to acquire a premier cornerback like Lattimore? C, would Nwosu play 3-4 outside linebacker? And who would you want to pair with him on the other side? Cheers from the UK. Also, I'll answer that question in a bit. Could Tillery play 3-4 right end? That's kind of interesting. And it's sort of interesting as a whole, this whole Staley 3-4 thing, because they don't play permanent 3-4. There will be times where they do play 4-3. It's not a static defense at all in that regard. My issue with Tillery starting at right end mainly has to do with his run defense, because he was bad at that last year. I mean, you saw the Raiders game where he started on the end. It's like, cool, he got the fumble on Carr, but also Devontae Booker is gashing you, dude. So was Josh Jacobs. So that's a problem for me when it comes to the right end conversation. I do think the Chargers' eventual goal for Tillery is to probably have him at defensive end because of his size and characteristics, but I just don't know if it makes a ton of sense to put him there yet. But he is getting another offseason this year, more opportunity to develop. I think if you're looking at a right end, it could be Tillery, it could be someone that they get in the draft. I think that they're probably going to fill that spot mostly with a little bit of like Leonard Floyd or someone like that, to be honest. But we'll see. B, do you see Staley trying to acquire a premier cornerback like Lattimore? I guess the Lattimore conversation has come from the Saints being in cap hell. I don't think Lattimore will be leaving the Saints. Yeah, and a lot of the premier cornerbacks are mostly are via trade, and I haven't heard many names that are like really available yet. So I don't think he'll try to get a premier CB like Lattimore. He could go in the draft, right, and surprise us and be like, hey, look, Caleb Farley, first round. You know, that's a possibility if Caleb Farley's available at 13, maybe JC Horn. I think he could go for a first round cornerback selection. That wouldn't shock me, but I don't think he'll acquire a first round corner or acquire a corner by a trade unless New Orleans is like, hey, we're in cap hell and we need to get out of it. Here's Lattimore. You know, under that scenario, maybe, but we just haven't heard much about that yet. We haven't heard many corners available by a trade other than like Patrick Peterson, who's already a free agent or someone like that, right? Would Nwosu play 3-4 outside linebacker, and who do you want to pair him with on the other side? Nwosu is definitely a possibility to play 3-4 outside linebacker. I don't think he'll play every down. I think he'll kind of be more of a rotational piece, but that also depends on what they do with Melvin Ingram and what they do with a lot of, you know, if they do bring in Leonard Floyd, right? I think it's I think he will definitely rotate in at 3-4 outside linebacker, but I don't really know who they want to pair him with yet. I think it'll become more clear post free agency and post draft, sort of what the defense will actually look like. But yeah, I think it's a little too early to say who he'll actually pair with. Josh also says, I'd like to know if you guys have been to the UK and what do you think of the UK NFL following? I went to a Cardinals game in LA in 2018. Loved my time in SoCal. I think the Chargers won that game big over the Cardinals, I remember. The UK following in the NFL has been super cool. I've never been to the UK personally, but I've always watched the London games, and the London games are sort of my favorite every year because I wake up at like 5 or 6 in the morning on the East Coast. And it's fun to see football in the morning, and you see, you know, all these soccer hooligans that fill the stadium and watch these NFL games. It's really cool to see the following over there. And I remember the Chargers playing the Titans a couple of years ago, and it was a packed house. Just, you know, seeing that enthusiasm on TV, the dart from Rivers to Tyrell Williams, I think on the first play of the game was fun. The block 2-point conversion. There was a lot of fun moments in that Chargers Titans game. It was a shame with the pandemic this year that they didn't get to do the London games, because those are honestly some of my favorite of the season. And I love seeing football in the morning and then playing at Wembley and all that. It is sort of a fun experience, but maybe you guys get a football team one day. I remember there were Chargers to London rumors a couple of years ago, and the London rumors always start back up. So that brings us to the end of this Q&A. I've been talking for a long time and need to take a big old gulp of water. But if you leave me comments on this thread on our YouTube channel, maybe I'll answer them in the next video, just kind of briefly. But this was a really fun Q&A to do. Let me know what you thought about some of the answers down below. Let me know what you think about Mike Williams and Orlando Brown, because I know this Q&A was chock full of Mike Williams and Orlando Brown. But yeah, again, thank you guys for watching. I'll definitely be sure to do more Q&As in the future, taking your guys' questions on our community page on the YouTube channel. And I will see you guys next week.